Let's talk about codependency and how I see it and explain it. My name is Trish Law. I'm a trauma-informed life coach. I help people see their patterns, get out of them so that they can live a most authentic life possible. Okay, so what is codependency? Codependency is when rules and roles are more important than individuality. In other words, when a system and how the system operates is more important than the person's authenticity that operates within the system. Codependency creates a reality, and the people that are within that system often do not understand that they're in a codependent system. This can happen in individual relationships. It can happen with families. It can happen in work environments. It can even happen geographically. And I'm going to give you tons of examples so that you understand it. So I often say that the opposite of codependency is authenticity. It's literally, authenticity is an antonym of codependency. Because if somebody separates from the system and begins to individuate, that's what it's called when you leave a codependent pattern, you individuate. It's often seen as threatening to the people that are still operating within the system. I want you to think of codependency as a watch, right? And then if you open the back of the watch, there's a bunch of different gears. And within those gears, they all sort of influence one another. Each gear has a very specific role, but they can't operate independently. They need one another in order to function. Does that make sense? So like really basic codependent contracts or codependent systems, really basic would be like the fuck up and the fixer, right? They both like are cogs in a system, and the fixer needs someone to fix and the fuck up needs someone to help fix them, and they sort of operate in that loop. There's rules that are assigned to the fuck up, and then there's rules that are assigned to the fixer. And the way that those rules are qualified is through the roles that they assume, right? So the fixer's rules would be, I am supposed to rescue people. I am supposed to put my needs down. I'm supposed to put other people's needs ahead of mine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Play the martyr. And the fuck up is my role, my job. The rules are that I never take personal responsibility. I never am responsible for cleaning up my own messes. The rules are I am basically never held to account for the consequences of my choices, thoughts, behaviors, and actions. It's kind of like a game. And these characters, right, like just on a TV show, adopt the role, they take on the role, and then they play by the rules. The rules and the roles are how these cogs work, right? Now, here's the payout of this is it meets a lot of needs for people to operate within the system, right? So for example, two specifically of the most important needs of the human ego are number one, certainty. Like how can I create an emotional, behavioral, thought pattern environment that I can be familiar with? And secondly, relevance or significance. What role do I take on in order to assure that certainty? Long story short, the two biggest needs of the ego are certainty and significance. How do I create certainty, and who do I need to be to get the certainty, right? Most of this is automated because the ego doesn't think about individuating. It doesn't think about authenticity. The ego's job is not to do that because that threatens the two things that perpetuate a sense of certainty. So that would be threatening to the ego to individuate or become authentic, if that makes sense. So in other words, we call people that are really enmeshed in a codependent gear system unconscious. This is not happening on a conscious level. So you can see how that might work in a relationship dynamic. We've got a narcissist, we've got an empath. I say often like an empath that lacks self-awareness is just as problematic, if not more toxic than a narcissist. They need each other in order to create those two needs. This is how I create certainty, and this is what role I need to take on to get it. Does that make sense? So let's broaden it out. Let's look at a family. Let's look at a family system. Let's like broaden that sort of system out into maybe 4 or 5 individuals. Okay, so in a codependent system within a family, there is typically roles and rules assigned to that. And it's typically the least healed person that sets the glass ceiling for people's ability to individuate. In other words, the system is typically reliant on the least conscious, most emotionally irresponsible, least healed person in order to maintain the consistency of the cogs in that system. So in a family, let's just look at maybe 5 individuals within a family structure. We've got mom, dad, and 3 children. Within that system, mom is the least healed, right? She's the least healed. And maybe dad is equally as unhealed or slightly less unhealed, but they're both not conscious. Mom is a victim. Dad is the villain, right? So we've got those 2 roles defined. And then we've got the 3 children. Typically we have, let's say, oldest, middle, youngest. Okay? So the codependent system is set by the least healed person. We have 5 people operating within that codependent system. Within that system, every child, so we have the defined, which is typically defined by the least healed person. Mom has chosen the victim martyr role. Dad has unconsciously chosen the villain role, right? And everybody has their rules and roles assigned on that level. Now shit's gonna run downhill. Now the 3 children have to figure out how they're gonna move in that cog system. And again, this is all unconscious. This is not like, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's like, I'm gonna assume the role of the villain, okay? Is that cool with you? This is typically set by the least healed person. Now, in the 3 cogs that are remaining, right, there's rules and roles assigned, but it has to co-assign with the system. And let's say, for example, the youngest is the golden child. This is the kid that is perfect, that the mother puts all the energy and attention into. The middle child becomes kind of the invisible one, and the oldest is maybe the scapegoat or the black sheep. Okay? Now, ego loves certainty and significance. How do I create certainty? What role do I need to take on to get it? Again, unconscious. This is like you and I talking, but this is not happening consciously. So the golden child plays their role, right? Which is to keep the mother and the father, typically moving the villain and the victim, moving in concert. The golden child's operating down here, doing the best they can, perfectionist. I'm going to be the one that gets the best grades. I'm the one that gets all the family attention. I'm the one that my mother pours all the attention and energy into. That helps the system continue to move. Middle child either is the peacekeeper or invisible or sort of is fine. It's the invisible child. The invisible child has a role as well. And the invisible child, it's threatening to the system for them to become visible. So they assume that role. Does that make sense? And then you got the black sheep or the scapegoat, the problem child. They're the one that sort of ruffles the feathers, and the mother like sort of triangulates maybe. She's like the victim. So she's going to say, oh, this child's a problem, pulls the golden child or the invisible child towards her, pushes the scapegoat away. So there's the system. We've got a beautiful codependent system going here. All the cogs are working perfectly. Now remember, codependency is the antonym to authenticity. Now when someone begins the golden child starts going to therapy, or the father starts to go to therapy, or the invisible child or the scapegoat, they're going to put on these magical glasses and they're going to be able to see all the cogs of the system. And maybe nobody else in the family has put on the magic glasses. Now, once the person that's put on the magic glasses that can see the system, you can't unsee the system once you see it. And you begin to reclaim your truth, your authenticity. You start to heal. You start to, work on your trauma, work on your wounds. See what this role that you've taken on has cost you, right? Typically, people that have been in codependent families for a long time often suffer from mental health issues. I wonder why. Because self-abandonment was the price of admission to keep the cogs of that wheel going. So when you heal and you start to take your energy back and you start to put yourself first, prioritize yourself, heal, you're often looked at as a threat from the codependent system, because you are. Because the system requires you to play that role in order for it to continue to go the way it's going. Does this make sense? This shit blew my mind. So that's my brass tacks crash course on codependency. I hope it makes sense.